Tisha B'Av is always a very difficult day for the Jewish people. It's been that way for a long, long time. I want to talk about a different day in more recent memory for all of us. October 8th, 2023. Remember that day? Remember when we were still coming to grips with what had happened the day before? Just the horror and the awe and the pain. But there was something else that was interesting about that day. What was interesting and memorable was that that day, at least in my lifetime, might have been the day where we had the most unity in years among the Jewish people. Orthodox Jews, Hasidic Jews, conservative Jews, Reform Jews, Reconstructionist Jews, atheists, all sorts of different Jews. The Jewish people felt that we had been hit in the head. Not just Israelis, all of us as Jews rallied together as one. There was incredible unity. Unfortunately, as often happens, we've lost a lot of that. And that's what we need to get back. If we want to rebuild the temple, the most recent of which was destroyed because of hatred amongst us, amongst Jews, we need to work on getting along. There is a very famous phrase, we're all familiar with it. It takes two to tango. What does that phrase mean? Well, it's something that parents will often say to their kids when they're in fights. You'll say to one of them, it takes two to tango. If you stop, then the fight will stop. But what about them? Watch, just try it. If you stop, the fight will stop because it takes two to tango. And that's often the case. But it's not really so accurate. It really often takes one to tango. Because yes, to keep a fight going, you need two. If one person stops and just removes himself, the fight will stop. But the grudge continues. If you want that grudge to end, each individual can stop that grudge on their own. Just let it go. One person making the decision to stop tangoing, stop fighting, stop holding a grudge. I know somebody who a number of years ago was in a school or a camp, I don't remember which, and violated a rule. Whatever the rule was, not important. And someone else told on him. Someone snitched. Someone crossed over that blue line. Someone violated the rule of omerta. And that's a really, really bad infraction. In the mob, they'll do all sorts of cruel things. They'll kneecap somebody, break their fingers, throw somebody in a river with cement shoes on. But tattletale? Never. That's beyond the pale. And so I said to this person, it's obviously a very difficult situation, but there's one thing that's really, really important. You mentioned the story to me, so I'm just going to share this with you, and it would be difficult for me as well, but I'm just going to throw it out there. The most important part of the story is you have to figure out a way to forgive the snitch. And he said, that is going to be unbelievably difficult. And yet that's the obligation. There is a mitzvah in the Torah. And the mitzvah is that you have to love every fellow Jew, even the one who told on you. And additionally, there's a prohibition. You can't hate a fellow Jew in your heart. No exception. You got to get rid of that. And so he worked on it and worked on it and worked on it. That's one tangoing. Somebody else did something to you and they may not apologize. You may never get that mea culpa. You may never get that my bad. You may never get that I feel so terrible. Or maybe you will someday. But whether or not you do, it's your job to forgive because it takes one to tango. And if you don't, it's so powerful holding on to a grudge that the rabbis instituted a prayer that we're supposed to say every night before we go to sleep. We say a prayer where we forgive anybody who angered us, who hurt us, who insulted us, who hit us, who harmed us. In any way, shape, or form, we fully forgive them. And we say these words that are so unbelievably powerful. We say, God, please don't punish anyone because of me. We recognize the power in a grudge. That's taking one to tango. Meaning, doesn't matter if the person apologized. Doesn't matter if they're completely wrong. You don't want God issuing some sort of consequence to them because of the grudge that you're holding on to. You gotta spit it out, you gotta vomit it out, you gotta work through it, but that's your obligation. I have a friend who's mostly retired, spends almost all of his time these days making peace. He mediates disputes and divorces, financial disputes, general arguments, and he was called in to try to mediate a dispute between two parties that has been going on for many, many, many decades. One of the parties in the dispute happens to be a rabbi. That can happen. Shocking news. Rabbis are human beings. They can be insulted. Their feelings can be hurt. They can get involved in an argument. And so my friend sat down with this rabbi and he said, I saw something so interesting in a book. In the book, it quoted a rabbi who was quoting his rabbi who said that if somebody does something bad to you, you have to look for a way to do good towards them. And you know why you have to do that? Because you're supposed to imitate God. And God does the same thing. Someone sins against God, does something terrible, and God continues to give that person air to breathe, continues to let that person walk and talk and wake up the next morning. Person really arguably forfeited life, sinned against God, and God continues to show him good. But the author of this book pointed out that doesn't really make sense because God had a pre-existing relationship with that person. Imagine you've got a neighbor and you let them park in your driveway. And then that neighbor insults you and you decide, you know what? I'm going to let them continue to park in my driveway. You just keep up the relationship. But how do you know from the way God acts that you have to do something good for somebody who wrongs you, even if they're a stranger? And the author of this book said, you see, from what this rabbi explained, that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether there's a pre-existing relationship. The fact that God continues to do good for someone after that person shows a lack of respect to God by doing something that's sinful shows that no matter what, whether or not you have a pre-existing relationship with the other person, if they harm you, if they wrong you, if they insult you, you have to look for ways to do good for them. And of course, forgive them. And the rabbi realized what book my friend was quoting. Because the rabbi who was in this fight had written that book. He had written the words that whether or not you have a prior relationship with someone, if they wrong you, you must imitate God and look for ways to do good towards them, forgive them. And the rabbi said, I recognize that excerpt from that book because I wrote it, and you're right. And my friend is just about at the finish line, working through that dispute. And then there are times when two have tangoed and both decide they're going to work through it. And that is an unbelievably beautiful thing. That's the type of thing that's going to help us rebuild the temple. I want to share a few stories about those types of instances. There was a rabbi who made a shidduch. He suggested a young man and a young woman, and they started dating. And then certain other people got involved, shepherding it along. And at the end, after the shidduch went through and the couple got married, the rabbi, who could have used the money, was expecting some sort of monetary show of appreciation and gratitude, which is common. The parents of the young man and the young woman, to the extent they're able, they show appreciation by sending a check, sending some money to the shadchan. And instead, this rabbi got a bowl for his troubles. A bowl. That was it. Not a check. He didn't need a bowl. He needed a check. And he felt bad about it. He had a little bit of a grudge. He's only human. And what's he going to do? He took the high road. He wasn't going to say anything, but he just felt that he had been stiffed. No better word for it. Fast forward, this young couple gets married and they have a child. And a few years later, the rabbi hears the news that this young child has been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. Horrifying, life-threatening. And the rabbi immediately says to himself, oh my goodness, I really hope that this didn't happen in any way, shape, or form because I was still holding on to a grudge. So he went to his rabbi, his Rosh Yeshiva, the rabbi who led the yeshiva where he had studied, because he happened to be visiting him over Rosh Hashanah. He was visiting the city where his Rosh Yeshiva lived. And he said, Rosh Yeshiva, please tell me, is there any possibility that I'm to blame because I was holding on to the grudge? And the Rosh Yeshiva said to him, we never know exactly why God does anything, but there is a possibility. You have got to forgive this family, this couple, and their parents for not having given you the shadchan's gelt, the money that you were expecting. He said, okay, I'm going to work on it. And he prayed over the first day of Rosh Hashanah. And then the second day of Rosh Hashanah, he went back to the Rosh Yeshiva and he said to him, I'm 75% of the way there, but I just haven't been able to get to 100%. And the Rosh Yeshiva said to him, pretend there was the other way around. And it was your daughter who was sick. How badly would you want that other side to forgive you? He said, you're right, I'm going to work on it. And he did. The rest of the day, he worked on it until he finally fully got it out of his system and forgave them. And then he went home to the city where he lived. And after arriving home, there was an envelope in his mailbox with a couple $1,000s in it from these two families. I guess they had gone through the same calculus, and maybe they asked their rabbi. Maybe their rabbi said, look, you never know how God works, but is it possible anybody's holding a grudge against you? No, why would anybody hold a grudge against us? There was that rabbi, maybe we should have given him a few bucks instead of a bowl because he had suggested the shit up for this couple, the parents of this kid, give him some money. So they gave him this $2,000. And now this rabbi had a moral dilemma. On the one hand, he could really use the money. On the other hand, he had fully forgiven. And so how can he keep the money? On the other hand, well, is that a conflict? You could fully forgive the transgression or the insult and yet keep the money. If somebody damages you and they owe you money, you could receive the money that you're owed and forgive. But he just didn't feel right keeping the money, even though he thought that he could glide past that conflict by having still fully forgiven them. But maybe keeping it would show that he didn't fully forgive, and so he made a decision. He knew that in the city where he lived, and where this couple lived, there was an organization that helps parents of children with illnesses. So he knew there's no question this couple is going to need the services of that organization, and so he donated the $2,000 to that organization. This story is an example of two tangoing and both deciding to end it. One realizing, I shouldn't hold on to this grudge, and the other realizing, wait a minute, maybe there's a reason for this grudge. Let's do something about it. And they work it out. And in the end, the girl recovered. Years later, she's healthy, she's married, and she's a mother herself. Here's the next story. Several years ago, I was in Israel, teaching on a trip for Jewish men. And at the end of the trip, there was a goodbye dinner, and each different city from which the men hailed went out together. And so I was invited by one of these city groups to join them. And they went around the room, and each person shared like a reflection or something interesting from the trip, or how they grew from the trip. Many of them were in Israel for the first time. And one guy got up and he said the following. Last night, when we were at the Kotel, Friday night, I went over to one of the fellow people on our trip in our group, and he pointed to somebody. And he said, I want you to know something. 7 or so years ago, I went through an unbelievably contentious, difficult, hard-fought divorce from my wife. And I'm sure you don't remember this, but you were my wife's lawyer. And when I saw the list of names on this trip and saw that I was going to be going to Israel for the first time in my life with my ex-wife's divorce lawyer, who tortured me, who drove me crazy, who caused me sleepless nights, I said, I cannot believe this. But I decided to go on the trip anyway. And I want to say that after having spent a week with you, my new friend, I realized that as tough and SOB as you were, I understand that you were just doing your job. And I want you to know that I completely forgive you. And the lawyer got up next and said, you're right. Until you mentioned it last night, I didn't remember. I've been involved because that's my job in a lot of divorces. But I want you to know that even though I was doing my job, and I appreciate the compliment that you're giving me because I guess I did my job well, I want you to know from the bottom of my heart, I'm saying this to you now, publicly, my new friend, I apologize. Yes, I was doing my job, but to the extent that I caused you that torture, that angst, that anxiety, those sleepless nights, I apologize. And I really appreciate the fact that you forgave me. That's two people apologizing, forgiving, working it out. That's how we're going to rebuild the temple. That's what we should be focusing on Tisha B'Av. Another story on this topic. I have a friend, longtime friend. One of his older brothers passed away recently. And when I went to the Shiva, he told me the following story. He said, I don't know if you remember, but my brother was in a horrific car accident over 20 years ago. I said, of course I remember. He said, well, I want to tell you part of the story that I don't think you ever heard. His brother was living in Israel. And an Israeli, happened to be a secular Israeli, not that that's important to point out, but it will be later in the story, so I'm mentioning it, was speeding 100 miles an hour and hit a car which hit my friend's brother's car. And as a result, my friend's older brother lost both of his legs, double amputee.
And he spent months and months and months in and out of comas, in and out of hospitals, in and out of rehab. Finally, about 18 months after the accident, where he had rebuilt his life enough such that he felt that he could get away for a couple of days for the first time with his family, with his wife and his 6 children, the youngest of which was 2 years old at the time. The father lost both legs. So they rented an Airbnb somewhere, and they got there. It's very nice for the first time in so long to be away as a family. And he realized, my friend's older brother, wait, I know why the name of the city sounds familiar. I had forgotten. This is the city where the guy lives, the guy who hit me, the guy who caused the accident. I want to track him down. So I said, are you sure? He said, yes. He had the police report. He knew the guy's name, went to the local phone book. Guess there was only one guy with that name in that city. And he called him up. And he said, hi, are you so-and-so? Yes. He said, I'm the guy who was in the accident. I'm the guy, as you probably heard, who lost both of my legs. I'm here vacationing with my family. It's the first time we've been out. And I'm in your city. And I wanted to know if we can get together. Stoned, shocked silence on the other end of the line. And so my friend's older brother said to him, I want you to understand, I want to get together because I want to tell you that I've completely forgiven you. I've worked it through, and I understand that whatever happened was supposed to happen. God runs the world. I was supposed to lose my legs, and I want to see you and tell you face to face, not just over the phone, that I forgive you. I want to give you a hug. Here's where I'm staying. Please come by. And the guy said, okay. And the guy showed up an hour later. And he gets out of his car. He's got a beard and a yarmulke. He's got tzitzis flapping. And so when he gets out of the car, he says to him, you're so-and-so? He says, yes. He says, I saw the pictures afterwards. I didn't think that you were observant. Not that that matters. I just didn't think so. And the guy says, I wasn't observant at the time, but I heard what happened. I found out how serious the injuries were that you suffered. And I went through an analysis of my life and where I was holding. And I decided as a result to be choser l'tshuva, to become observant. And so that's why I look different now than I did then. And my friend's older brother said to him, and I'll tell you before repeating this, that I can't wrap my mind around this. I can't believe that a human being could get to the stage where he could say these words, but he said them. He wrapped them in a big hug. Couldn't stand to do it. The guy had to bend down for it. He asked him to lean in and told him as he hugged him, it was worth it for me to lose both of my legs to see you come back to your roots. And you should just know I mean it. I fully, fully, fully forgive you. And of course, the other guy couldn't stop apologizing. He said, you don't have to. You're forgiven. I'm sorry. You're forgiven. I'm sorry. You're forgiven. And that is how we're going brick by brick, relationship by relationship. Each one of us has to let it go, as difficult as it is. It doesn't matter how ornery, how stubborn, how unapologetic the other side is. If they owe you money, you can still insist on being repaid. I'm not talking about that. But the personal harm, the personal insult, the pain that they've given you, and they're totally wrong. I know it. You'll tell me. They're wrong. I'm right. Doesn't matter. You have to love every fellow Jew, and you can't hate a fellow Jew in your heart. And that, perhaps more than anything, is the thing to work on Tisha B'Av. Getting together and staying together. I had twin boys. They're about 15 and a half now. And one of the most remarkable things about watching them grow up is they get into a fight. Siblings get into fights. Sometimes siblings get into fights and they never make up. I mean, sometimes it can last a month, it can last a week, it can last for days. They get into a fight and 10 minutes later, they can be sitting next to each other on the couch, reading, their arms like grazing against each other. And I'd come to them and I'd say, guys, you made up? Weren't you in a fight? And they look at me like, yeah, like, but it's over. Like, we worked it through. And I wonder, maybe that's why God put twins in the world, to show us that's how you act. We get into the fight. We try to avoid it, of course. But afterwards, we get over it. It takes one to tango. Yes, it's great if both can put down their weaponry and both can work it through. But if they can't, your obligation, you yourself is, regardless, even though I'm right, I'm going to apologize. Regardless, even though they're wrong, I am going to forgive. And I don't want anyone punished because of me. And if you do that on Tisha B'Av or on any other day, then you are going to have superpowers. You're going to be able to put on that cape. Not just going to be Superman in a new movie that's going to have a big S on his chest. You're going to stand on Yom Kippur and you're going to say, God, you know how badly so-and-so wronged me. You know I was right. You know they were wrong. You know they didn't apologize. You know there's no excuse. By the way, I'm sure there's an excuse. When we do something wrong, there's always an excuse. When someone else does, there's never an excuse. There is an excuse. But even if you can't imagine, you can't come up with that excuse. God, you know how tough it was. And yet I worked through it. I forgave them. And so I'm asking you, I'm just flesh and blood and I was able to forgive. You're God up in heaven. And so I'm asking you to forgive my transgressions and to give me another year of life. That is a superpowered prayer. So let's hope that all of us, this coming Yom Kippur, will be able to pray as if we're on steroids, as if we've got that superhero's cape, while fasting again, looking up to heaven, having worked through, letting go of our grudges.